Good evening. A very warm welcome to all the participants in our 65th webinar in our Rtambhara talk series. A special welcome to speakers, Mr. Professor Piero Formica, for making the time to be with us here today, and a special thanks to our program director, Sri Krishnapani K.C. Raju, for reading the book under discussion today, Econaissance, which I believe has valuable inputs on economics as well as spirituality. He'll be in conversation with Mr. Piero Formica. Before we introduce our speakers today, and for those who were not here earlier and have joined us today, Rtambhara Wellness is a collective of like-minded individuals that look at wellness in a holistic way, not just the body, but the mind as well, and all through the practice of knowledge and wisdom that comes from our ancient Indian scriptures and heritage, as well as global knowledge and best practices. We conduct corporate programs and retreats for wellness that look at self-discovery and personal transformation and tapping into oneself to unlock our infinite potential. Presently, we're conducting these programs virtually. And our virtual corporate programs are uploaded on our website, rtambharawellness.com. Do visit our website and go through the details of these programs. We also conduct webinars regularly on topics that delve into self-discovery, personal transformation, health, harmony, and holistic well-being, as well as the arts, which help us connect with our higher selves. All our earlier talks are uploaded on YouTube under Rtambhara Wellness. If you'd like to be part of our community, the details of where you can connect with us are posted on the chat. Alternately, please post your contact details, cell number, email ID, and we can add you to our groups. So let's get on with today's program, where Mr. Piero Formica and Sri Krishnapani ji will be talking to us on well-having versus well-being, an economic perspective from a cultural, social, and spiritual outlook. Today's session will be a dialogue for around an hour, followed by Q&A. A request to all of you to stay muted through the talk, but please feel free to keep your videos on and also post your questions on the chat function that you find at the bottom of your screen. It's my honor and privilege to introduce the main speaker tonight, Mr. Piero Formica. A little about him, and there's quite a lot actually, so we had to filter that down. Professor Formica is the founder of the International Entrepreneurship Academy. He was professor of economics with a particular focus on innovation and entrepreneurship at the Jönköping International Business School, Jönköping University in Sweden. From 2010, he's been a senior research fellow of the Innovational Value Institute at Maynooth University in Ireland, where he leads an international research team on experimentation and simulation of high expectation startups. At the business school ISAM in Paris and at the C Lab in Vento, Mr. Piero Formica, in the role of professor and mentor, conducts experiments for the development of innovative projects by students who attend the lab. Professor Formica has received the Innovation Luminary Award in June 2017 from the Open Innovation Science and Policy Group under the aegis of the European Union for his work on modern innovation policy. He has published extensively in the fields of knowledge economics, entrepreneurship, and innovations. His most recent published works, and they include many of them, so I'll just name a few. There's The Experimental Nature of New Venture Creation, Stories of Innovation for the Millennial Generation, The Role of Creative Ignorance, Grand Transformation Towards an Entrepreneurial Economy, Entrepreneurial Renaissance, Cities Striving Towards an Era of Renaissance and Revival, Exploring the Culture of Open Innovation Towards an Altruistic Model of Economy, The Value of Humanities Studies for Business, and what we're going to be talking about extensively today, Reconnaissance, the reimagined school, and the culture of entrepreneurship. A little about Sri Krishnapani K.C. Raju. Sri Krishnapani K.C. Raju is a mechanical engineering graduate with professional qualifications in management and law. He has more than 41 years of experience in industry and academia. Currently, he runs his own consulting and trading business. Study and research in ancient Indian philosophical and spiritual literature is his passion. He is engaged in synthesizing ancient and modern thought on deeper aspects of life and its purpose. He is a keen student of Vedanta, Theosophy, and Jiddu Krishnamurti's teachings. Krishnapaniji is an invited speaker at various management and spiritual forums. He is the program director at Rtambhara and the enabler for the spiritual and transcendental dimensions of holistic well being at Rtambhara. So, welcome both of you. We look forward to a very interesting conversation. Over to you, Krishna Paniji and Mr. Piero.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Binaji, for that wonderful introduction. And I am really honored to be having this conversation with Professor Piero Formica, a, a person with almost 5 decades of experience and knowledge in working through various organizations and universities. He was just telling us that he was with the OECD and other international organizations also. And I had the privilege of receiving the soft copy of his book, Econoscience. And I had gone through it very carefully. And what has really fascinated me is that, the spread of ideas, the flow of ideas is something universal. And I was reminded of the mantra from the Rig Veda, which says, Ano bhadraha kratavo yantu vishwataha, which means let noble thoughts come to us from all directions. So I was really fascinated by the ideas that have been presented in this book, which we are going to very shortly discuss. I'm very much aware of the fact that we do not have much time. I would like to, given an opportunity, I would like to have a longer discussion, but because of several constraints, we are restricting it to 1 hour. And the focus will be on econoscience, as we have given the title of well-having versus well-being, which I'll come to during the interaction with Professor Formica. But let me start, Professor Formica, by asking you a question regarding this book, Econoscience. I would like to know how and when this idea of econoscience, which you have called it as the interweaving of economy, knowledge, and renaissance. When was this born? When was this germ of this idea was born in your mind? And what was the background for it?
First of all, thank you very much to you all, very kind persons, a very knowledgeable person. I saw the film, the documentary presentation of your institute is amazing. And I would like to spend 1 month with you to restore my mindset. Who knows when, since we are under the pandemic. Said this, and thanks for your kind words again, the origin of this book. The origin is, when I was a young student in macroeconomics, we were accustomed, even nowadays, to study what does mean GDP, the gross domestic product. Can you hear me? I can't hear you now. The gross domestic product was a measurement, a way of testing the health of the economy, which in some way was originated during the year of the Great Depression in the States. At that time, the GDP was a sort of a calf. And the year after year, coming to nowadays, this calf has become a bull, a furious, tyrannical bull. Everything rounds around the GDP. It's a sort of a Ptolemaic word, GDP. But the GDP is about the quantity of companies, quantity of revenues, quantity of goods, services. What's about the quality? What's about the quality? What's about the use of the natural resources? More resources we use from the nature, and more the nature can, not must, but can suffer. So the GDP is a scissor nowadays, is a scissor, is even dangerous, valuable, but at the same time dangerous. The reason for which we need to rebalance our economic thinking and the word like happiness, education, new way of working, culture, which I call the culture of entrepreneurialism and the culture of entrepreneurship, to me are tremendous important to reinventing the way we use to live under the attack of the bull called the GDP. This is so the origin is very far away, not from nowadays, long time. But at the end of the day, at my third age, the third part of the age, third and final part of the age of a person, I said, okay, I must write something about the calf which turns into a bull.
Yes, that's a very interesting idea, which was a calf, the GDP, which has become now a bull and uncontrollable, and seemed to dominate the whole thinking of the economists. And you have rightly focused on what you have called as the shift from quantity to quality, the use of your proper use of natural resources, and also the rebalancing. The word which you have used is rebalancing, and coming back to that culture of entrepreneurship, which talks more in terms of happiness and well-being. That's really wonderful. Professor, I would like you to very briefly elaborate upon the core elements of the structure of econoscience.
Okay. So leaving for the moment the GDP, I said already about the GDP, I say something about happiness. The students of economics, they know Adam Smith, the wealth of the nation.
Right.
But unfortunately, most of them, they don't know the theory of moral sentiments. The famous theory, you are a philosopher, my dear professor, you know, the theory of moral sentiments. This is a book of tremendous importance to my mind, since the book explains what does really mean happiness. And this happiness in the Adam Smith moral sentiment is a concept which derives from being happy, to help, to support the other to be happy.
Yeah.
He wrote, I quote Adam Smith, regard is more than giving for charitable purposes. It is making oneself share in the fortunes of others, being for men necessary the happiness of others, even though the person who gives, he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it, the pleasure to see the other happy. And from Adam Smith to the John Maynard Keynes, who was one of our master when we were at my generation at least. At the end of the First World War, when there was a decline sharply in the economy, another depression, in 1919, Maynard wrote about happiness. He brought happiness to the attention of the business world. And he denounces, and again I quote, abhorrent and detestable the policy of degrading the lives of millions of human beings and of depriving a whole nation of happiness.
Oh,
This was the case.
Very profound.
And then finally in the 50s, with the recovery, the boom, in Italy was called the miracle, economic miracle. The dream was there is a larger cake, everybody can get a slice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen this. Nowadays we have a cake with 90% or 95% of the slice is in the end of a few.
Yes. Yes.
So that we need to reshape the cake, saying that we need a larger cake which allows more people to be in the party. And this is another way of looking at the happiness vis-a-vis the disproportionate profits. Incidentally, profits is not a law of God, is an accountant convention.
Yes.
It's an accountant instrument, which doesn't sell everything, doesn't say everything.
Yes.
Just an example. If I have a meadow with a lot of green, bees, pollination, the sheeps there, animals, and then I turn the meadow in a skyscraper, the GDP say, very good, great, there is a skyscraper. There is no more meadow, there are no more bees, the nature suffer, and we have the virus. So that the GDP, again, doesn't say as everything.
Yeah.
So this is the germ, to my mind, the germ of happiness in the philosopher like Adam Smith, economists like John Maynard Keynes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, people talk about Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations, and they talk about the Keynesian theory, but nobody talks about what they said about happiness. And the question of deriving more happiness by giving and seeing other people happy. You know, that's something which is actually, it's not an economic activity, but it's more a question of a human activity and a spiritual orientation to the human activity. And your very first paragraph, the very first paragraph of your book talks about well-having versus well-being. That's where we have drawn the title of our discussion also, because this aspect seems to have been neglected for a long time. And as you rightly said in the beginning, the GDP took over. That became the, the biggest aspect for all economic activity. And somehow I feel that the West has neglected this for a long time. And now we are at a very critical point. How do you think that a reorientation of the whole thinking in the West has to be initiated?
To my mind, the first move, to my mind, this is at this stage of the state of art of the humanity, is the reimagination of the education, not reform.
Okay.
Reform is about trade unions, organization. Reimagination is another story.
Right.
I remind you that the famous fiction writer of the between the 1800 and 1900, his name was Herbert George Wells. He wrote,
H.G. Wells.
human history is increasingly becoming a race between education and catastrophe. A race between education and catastrophe.
Education and catastrophe.
Catastrophe.
Yeah.
Now, what is the problem here? With the first industrial revolution was a division of labor. The artisan turned into a job, just a piece, a small piece of job, not a vision, just a piece. And the same applies to education. Before the Industrial Revolution, education was horizontal. Like our director here is a mechanical engineering, is a philosopher. He is a polymath, French expression, a polymath. And before the Industrial Revolution, school was for shaping the model of the polymath. Madame du Châtelet was a scientist and humanist in the same time. Einstein used to read David Hume, and so on and so forth. So that nowadays we live in the vertical education model. You study engineer, you know very few about a poet. You study philosophy, and you don't know what does mean numerical control machine tools.
Right.
Or you know the mechanical engineering, and then you don't know nothing about the narratives.
No.
So vertical specialization.
Yeah.
I used to say we enter into a well of knowledge, vertical knowledge. We go down, down, down. At the end of the pit, we know all about nothing since the world has changed. So there is a tremendous need to come back to reimagine the education in a transversal way. I say transdisciplinarity.
Right.
Trans, not inter, trans.
Transdisciplinarity.
I give you just one example. The origin of Maynooth University has been the Catholic seminar in the 1700s. Since that time, the student theology, they were encouraged to study theology and science. So that one of that time of Father Nicholas Callan was a famous theologist as a student who invented the part of mechanical engineering, the bacteria, part of the bacteria. Since he was a student of Volta and Galvani in Rome, galvanization, Professor Galvani, the origin of mechanics, and so on and so forth. So that we need to come back in some way to a transdisciplinary education. Otherwise, we are lost, since we are passing from mechanics to, which is a sort of a view of a man who is a master of everything and mechanically can change the world, to an holistic person who does respect the other, the nature, across philosophy, mechanics, chemistry, and so on and so forth. And we have so many scientists who have been at the same time great humanists and vice versa.
That's really wonderful. Actually, as you rightly said, instead of there's no question of reforming education. Now it's a question of reimagining and bringing about what you have very beautifully called as a transdiscipline exchange of views and ideas and the learning process. And I also like the idea of what you have presented as the well of knowledge of knowing everything about nothing. In fact, the Western research, research is what they are now calling as knowing more and more about less and less.
Yeah.
So you have rightly said, when I was looking at your YouTube video on creative ignorance, you have really mentioned about that well of knowledge versus the sea of ignorance, the island of excitement and ignorance. So we are going deeper and deeper into something and ignoring the vast open ocean that is there for us to discover. And coming back to your book, one interesting thing which I found is you have given several quotes from very famous authors and philosophers who are of Italian, French, and German origin.
Yeah.
Very rarely we see that. The dominance of Anglophone, what they call as the English language, has relegated many great philosophers and thinkers of Europe to more or less footnotes in books. And I'm very happy that you brought about this, and you have given us a very comprehensive view of the history, literature, arts, and philosophy, which you have talked about in your book. And I would like you to draw your attention to some interesting ideas which you have presented. Mainly, you have talked about altruism.
Mhm.
You have talked about altruism and imbued with the spirit of Renaissance. Now, how do you correlate economics and altruism?
You see, the Dutch people, they used to say, those who share, they multiply.
Oh,
Those
wonderful.
who share, they multiply. Sharing has a multiplier effect.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Another a statistical point of view, as far as the numbers are, they say the truth. By the way, we can say at this moment that the countries which practice the reciprocity sharing, are more happy than countries where the reciprocity is low.
Oh,
There are among the 21st country, 25 countries out of 40 or 440 in the World Giving Index, most of these countries among the 24 are countries where altruism, sharing for multiplying, has a great relevance. So altruism makes a difference. And I could say that this happened in the Italian Renaissance in Florence. The famous English word is a workshop. From Latin, the real word is bottega. In the famous artist Verrocchio, we are in the Renaissance time. In this Renaissance bottega, where Botticelli, Leonardo, and the others, together with engineer, mecenates, artisan, all working together and all reciprocating the way of doing and the style of living. And this was the great achievement, which was called from the Medici family, Medici effect, the effect of multiplying by sharing, Just another word, sorry, when you said the about the languages.
yeah.
For instance, everybody talk about the cafeteria effect.
Yeah.
The campus in Cambridge, in Oxford, in the States. But much before the cafeteria effect, there was in India the Adda, the Calcutta Adda.
Yes.
The Calcutta Adda, the great culture of a conversation, the Adda conversation. Conversation apparently without purpose, pointless, but source of great creativity.
Right.
Before the campus cafeteria, there were in Bologna the coffee shop where during the evening time, the blue collars, they used to play cards. And playing cards, they create a great company in packaging machinery. You know very well, you are mechanical engineering. Bologna is the capital town of packaging machinery. And this was the result of an artisan playing cards in the coffee shop. In horizontal, this is no boss, no hierarchy, all are equal. So that once a language become a tyrant, like the English language, unfortunately in this case, we can get a problem.
Yes.
For Europe is a great problem, since in Europe the language was the Latin. Copernicus wrote in Latin. Newton wrote in Latin.
Yes.
Language was Latin. And nowadays we have a myriad of languages, and then we use the sort of English, which is, say, quoted English in some way. I don't say that we should talk only our own indigenous language, but there is a need to explore the way of keeping the culture with ourselves, so that the Adda should be a word used in the same way as we use a cafeteria, campus cafeteria, and so on and so forth. So that from India, from Europe, especially countries which language original has not been English, we need to promote ourselves. I am happy that my new publisher in Chicago, my new book, The Nature Voice, has published this book in English and in Italian, but not in the same book, two books. Same statement, but one book in English and the other one in Italian.
That's wonderful.
We need this. And incidentally, about the Latin, you should know that nowadays there are Latin radio. The most famous one is in Finland, in Tampere.
That's interesting.
Radio in Latin. Yes. There is a revival of Latin, and The Economist 2 years ago was a cover of Economist called Latin Lover is coming back. Latin Lover, you know, is a joke, around the Latin Lover. The Latin Lover is coming back.
No, that's wonderful, actually. As you have said, the language, I have really found very interesting quotations in your book, which we rarely come across in English books. Talking about the Italian, French, and German thinkers and philosophers. And as you rightly said, the revival of our culture, holding on to our culture would be a great contribution to this kind of thinking. And Professor, I have found another interesting aspect in your book, because normally economists talk about land, labor, and money as capital. But you have very beautifully mentioned about imagination, relational, reputational, and entrepreneurial capital. Can you just briefly explain these four terms which we have used as the actual capital that is required for a new entrepreneurialism and a reimagination of entrepreneurship as a whole?
There is a friend of mine from Sweden, his name is Leif Edvson, who was, times ago, he was a top senior in an assurance company in Sweden called the Scandia. He was the first in the world to produce a report of the intangibles. The corporate reports is about, at the end of the day, it's about money.
Right.
He wrote, it was the first company to publish a report about the intangibles. Imagination, reputation are words of the intangibles, are incommensurable.
Right.
But what is the effect of imagination, of reciprocity, of creativity? And coming back to my friend, Leif, we can see the tree, a tree as it is. The roots are down and the fruits are up. You don't see the roots, you see
Right.
the fruits.
Right.
Imagination, creativity, and so on and so forth, they help you to turn the tree up down. You put
Right.
the roots at the top and the fruits down. And the
That-
roots are the intangibles. You see the intangibles. Entrepreneurialism is a culture which allows people not to imagine himself or herself as a job seeker, but as an idea seeker, idea maker, and ideator. You are no more a worker, you
Yes.
are an ideator. And anytime you knock the door of a company, of intelligent company, the company said to you, please, can you work for us? You work as an ideator, not as a simple executor of orders. So
Correct.
you generate new things, new way of producing, new way of servicing, new way of reaching market, take care of the needs of the nature. And this is a culture which anticipates the entrepreneurship.
Right.
Since if there is no culture of entrepreneurialism, the enterprise we create are the usual one, based on the small GDP, the GDP of the company, but it's always still a GDP or similar to the GDP. So that to me, the culture of entrepreneurialism is a way of changing how we look at ourselves. And again, we need the type of education which is transdisciplinarity, and we need the reciprocity, and so on and so forth. The intangibles are becoming very important. And nowadays, there are some companies which produce a report of the intellectual capital,
Right.
which means that at the end of the day is the report about the portfolio of ideas, portfolio of creativity, which is not a measurement, it's
Right.
a narrative. And the narrative has a great relevance.
Right.
The narrative. You can read thousand number about the Great Depression of in the States during the 30s. But once you read Steinbeck,
Yeah.
what he wrote about the Great Depression, the narrative of Steinbeck, you understand much better what does mean depression than
Right.
reading a thousand of numbers and models around the numbers.
That's
And
what-
nowadays there are this very good news, economists who take care of the narratives and they want to turn the GDP in another way or accompany the GDP with the other measurement.
That's wonderful. Actually, what you have said is about these intangibles. This is something which is unique because the effect of these intangibles can be seen in the profit and the share market and other things, but nobody is able to actually create that narrative of the intangibles. That should take the center stage now to talk about it. And you have wonderfully reminded me of your book has that picture of the roots being up and the fruits and the leaves being down, which reminds me of a very beautiful verse in the Bhagavad Gita, the ancient scripture that is available to us, which is the most famous scripture in India. The Bhagavad Gita talks about the same thing. Urdhva moolam adhashakham. The roots are up and the leaves and the branches are below. So that gives a vision of the roots which are normally hidden. And unless you create this capital of what you call as reputation and imagination and entrepreneurialism, you can't really thrive in the modern economy. So that's one wonderful idea which you have presented, and thank you for it. And I'll now go to the other idea which you have presented, where I would like you to briefly tell us about. You have the term STEM is very famous in the US, which talks about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But you have added an A to it and called it as STEAM, where you have added this arts as an important element for entrepreneurialism, and also for cultivating novel ideas, and what you have called as invention and innovation. Especially you talked about disruptive innovation. I'd like you to dwell on this aspect of STEAM.
Okay. Just a second, back to the tree. May I suggest, I don't know when you one of your next talk like this, I recommend you to invite Leif Edilson, who was at the origin of this tree. If you like, you write me an email, I send you the Leif email. He's a very nice gentleman, and this report about the intangibles has a relevance. Now, STEM, even in Italy, the companies coming from the culture of industrial revolution, they are egoist. Egoism.
Yeah.
How do you manifest egoism? And even in my city, in Bologna, packaging machinery, we have not enough engineer.
No.
Through the robot, Czech, from Czech word, Czechoslovakia word, robot means slave in Czech language.
Right.
So nowadays, robot, artificial intelligence. What does it mean? That you see these youngsters educated in technology who say to the robot, I am very satisfied that you, robot, you say to me, you are doing a nice job. So the commander-in-chief is the robot. And the youngster educated on the STEM are the new slaves. Professor Skinner, decades ago in psychology, he said, whereas we are so focused on researching how robot can think, we human beings in the future, we will continue to think. We will continue to think. We must think. So we must be thinker.
Yeah.
And to be thinker, if you study vertically like the STEM, you are no more a thinker. STEM remind me the electrification. Industrial revolution, electrification. And incidentally, since at least in my country, in Italy, I don't know, in India, most of the ladies, they don't study STEM, but they study humanities. They don't study the humanities. No, these ladies, they remain unemployment. Go to study engineering. Rather than saying, we mix the cards, and we mix science, technology, engineering, with the humanities. Arts is the humanities.
Right.
And we call this STEM. Incidentally, the word technology from the Greek techne in ancient Greek means art.
Oh.
Okay. So that STEM is the passage from electrification to knowledgeification.
Oh, yeah.
I call this knowledge, the new knowledge. And incidentally, STEAM is the new energy. The STEAM, once upon a time, was the energy for the mechanical engineering.
Right.
STEAM is the energy for putting knowledge into action, moving knowledge. And then once the knowledge moves, then you become ignorant. Since ignorance doesn't come before knowledge, it comes after knowledge. First, you are a knowledgeable person, and then you ask yourself why the the sun, why the sun is going around the earth. You are Ptolemaic in some way. Why the earth is at the center of the world. You start everything about Ptolemaeus, and then you say, maybe Ptolemaeus was wrong. So that the stem is the old way of doing. And they do this in the companies which are egoist, short view, short-term view, short-termist.
Oh.
The company which are altruist and very intelligent, they are transformative. They turn the tree up down, like did Leif Edison. And they discover that moving knowledge into action, this happens through the energy, which is the combination, confusion of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics.
Right. That's very well put, because you have shown in your book also about the importance of humanities and how it actually contributes towards environmentalism and also better entrepreneurial vision of things. And I really like that idea which you presented about workers and ideators, where you call that workers answer questions, whereas ideators ask the questions.
Yeah.
That is and the beautiful idea of ignorance coming after knowledge.
Yeah.
Is another beautiful way of putting it, where you are not stuck with what you are, but you progress to become more and more ignorant so that you can put better questions and then visualize better answers for things that are happening. I would like to come to one more interesting idea of entrepreneurialism being made into a cultural movement. How we need to transform entrepreneurship to entrepreneurialism, as you say, which is more of a cultural movement. And you have also talked about two other aspects which I want you to put some light on. One is what you called as the empathic enterprise. And the other one you have called, you have mentioned as promoting social and spiritual well-being. Can you explain this in terms of what you have presented in your book?
The culture of entrepreneurialism turns into transformative entrepreneurship. Transformative means change the state of the art.
Okay.
It's not an acceleration. You change the gear. You are moving the car, you put the accelerator. No, not accelerator. You change the gear from third to fourth, from fourth to fifth. How this can happen? Through creation of environment where people of different ideas, different disciplines, they can merge together, like in the Renaissance time.
Yeah.
Through mecenatism, people who give, mecenat, was a tremendous important this point, this phenomenon during the Renaissance time. I give you another example. In Cambridge, UK, when I was a young boy in Cambridge was a city of colleges and potato field.
Oh, potato fields.
No. Then what's happened? Some people in Cambridge, I could say manager, entrepreneur, who in Cambridge they generate their wealth, they used to spend the money like mecenat, and to allow students from Cambridge to meet the students from India, from China. They create a flow. And nowadays, Cambridge is a sort of field with so many different species of flowers, which are transformative companies. A friend of mine, Professor Alan Barrell, 80 years old nowadays, he was a successful manager. He has created links, flows between China and Cambridge, youngsters, and he has been appointed the professor in residence for his achievement, which means at the end of the day, borderless company, borderless startups created by Chinese and English or other country students in Cambridge. So a mix, hybridization of the environment. So it's a recipe, the passage from entrepreneurialism to entrepreneurship is a recipe of a different ingredient. So far, what I saw around the world, we have used a lot of hard ingredients, public money, science parks, incubators. Why not? But I have investigated a lot of this environment since 14 years, in the 90s. I have been in the position of the member of the scientific committee of the incubators in the International Association of Science Parks. So I was in India, in China, and I saw all this mega infrastructure, a lot of agenda full of items, but in some way hard approach,
Yes.
not agile, hard approach is necessary, I understand, but we need now to rebalance again. We need a soft approach. We need the altruist personality people. In Cambridge, I ask these people, why you spend your money for supporting the students? And they said to me, since in Cambridge I got my fortune, I give back something to Cambridge, give back.
Yes.
If I give back, Cambridge becomes more solid, no? More healthy. And if it becomes healthy, even myself, I am healthy. Otherwise, you know the tale of me, the king. If you produce gold, at the end you eat gold, you can't eat gold.
Yes.
You starve.
Yes.
Starving. So that I got success, I give back. Maybe only the third priority, maybe they can get back something in terms of money. But first was a donor, a giving. So we needed these soft actions, not only the science parks, incubator. Without this soft action, I don't see any valuable transformation in a larger scale. Since we don't need 2 or 3 transformative companies, we need to transform all the body of entrepreneurialism nowadays.
That is wonderful.
At
Actually,
origin,
because as you rightly said, that's the empathic enterprise where you give back to the society and promote social well-being. You also talked about it, and the spiritual well-being comes from being altruistic. Altruistic not for the sake of altruism, but it makes a lot of economic sense.
Yeah.
You know, as you rightly said, the more you give, the more it multiplies.
Yeah.
And that seems to be lacking now, but you have sown these seeds in the human consciousness where the transformation can happen. The real transformation can happen. Lastly, Professor, I would like you to dwell upon the idea of how do you see this evolution towards cultural, social, and spiritual integration through the eyes of an economist, because
As
you
an
have been an
economist.
economist. So, but you have talked about the cultural, social, and the spiritual integration for the ultimate goal of what you have called as entrepreneurialism. And you have also talked about substantial reduction of inequalities, providing the right space for innovation and creation of what you have beautifully mentioned in your book as happiness abundance. So how, from the eyes of an economist, do you see the future of human evolution where we are more integrated from the cultural, social, and spiritual aspects?
I think that again there are several recipes, several ingredients to put together. For instance, your institute should be, in my mind, even a sort of house for young economists to understand what you do,
Right.
and the relevance of what you have described at the beginning of this event, of this talk. So again, a despecialization. If your institute should be not only an institute for, I assume, people who are involved in yoga and so on and so forth, but should be a house of ideas for people coming from a diversity of species.
Right.
The same applies vice versa. The school, the business school, should be connected with you in some way and to do things together, since the education is at the foundation of this exercise. Then there is a need to change the way of the governance of the company, especially in the small, so-called small and medium-sized company. There's a lot of familism.
Yeah.
I call this amoral familism. You are the entrepreneur, and your son, by definition, is the entrepreneur next to you. Entrepreneur is not a heritage, a legacy. Is like an artist. The son of a Picasso is not Picasso. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
The son of a Picasso is not Picasso. Whereas in my country, in Italy, the son of the entrepreneurs are the name of them is entrepreneur. It's stupid, it's foolish. So then we need to change the habit, the custom, the way of living inside the company. And third, again, coming back to company, we must dismiss the idea that a company is small, medium, or large in terms of quantity. Is small, medium, or large in terms of quality, not in terms of quantity. In terms of quality, which transform the company into an environment where profit doesn't mean rent.
Right.
Since
the video is stuck. Veena-ji, I think his video is stuck.
Yeah,
maybe the connectivity, there's some problem of connectivity.
I miss you for some more minutes.
Yes, for a few seconds. You were talking about the third aspect of quality.
Oh, quality. Okay. These are my point. And the government should support this. Stop to this transformation of a macroeconomics, but this is a long story which can't be deal nowadays.
Right. So that these three ideas are good. You know, the bringing about diversity and bringing a multidisciplinary approach to learning, where, as you rightly said, young economists should be brought together to disseminate these ideas of sharing and what you have called as co-optation, uh, cooperation at one side and competition on the other side.
Yeah.
Both of them should come together as what you have called as co-optation. And second thing is that is true, I think, all over the world, where the legal heirs of the companies automatically think that they have a right to become the owners of such enterprises without having the necessary quality or qualification to actually run such organizations. And thirdly, the importance, the shifting from quantitative aspects to qualitative aspects, even when you talk about small or medium or large enterprises, it should be more defined in terms of the quality rather than the quantity alone. I think that's a wonderful idea. And we are already at 8:06 here. We have spent almost an hour. I'd like to open for a discussion for some questions which are posted by our listeners here. One question by Mr. Shetty. He says, can you measure or monetize nature or sustainability, which is ignored in the contemporary economics and GDP? So how do you measure or monetize the sustainability of nature? And that, how can you bring that into the into focus in economics?
We must change the convention of the accountants.
Okay.
What is the value? I am the owner of a meadow. Again, I come back to my previous point. I see the bees, I see the cows, I see the animals there.
Yes.
And then I say to myself, but what I do? Okay, the landscape is nice, but I would like to get money since I want to buy a big apartment in the Central Park in New York. Yeah. So that you sell your meadow, you get to a real estate, they raise the skyscraper, the GDP goes up, you become rich. So if we use this type of account as a way of living, there is no solution. You imagine a society with quality, not quantity, the virus effect, it will be lower. Quantity of people going to ski, quantity of people going to Delhi, to Bangalore, to Rome, quantity, the virus says, okay, I beat you. So that we must change I have the impression that we think for instance, the account is a sort of God law, is a convention.
Right.
The nature is not like a bird that you go hunting, boom, boom, boom. Not at all. Nature is a subject, is not an object. It's a subject, like us.
Way of putting it.
And we are part of the nature.
All right.
So that if we don't change the conventions, GDP, accounts, profits, we are lost as we are nowadays. A lot of unemployed since the quantity has generated a lot of troubles. Right. A lot of troubles. So the answer is in the challenging and defeat the conventions. Become ignorant. You must forget the accountant principle, and then you invent a new account. In the new account, the pollination and the bees, they have a value different nowadays. Okay. If you think the bees and the pollination is irrelevant, you know how much important is the pollination for us. Okay, you are lost.
Yeah, in fact, it is said that if the bees become extinct, the entire humanity will also become extinct in about 2 decades or so. So we don't realize that importance. And I really like that beautiful idea of seeing nature as a subject and not as an object for exploitation. It should become a subject to us, and we should realize that we are a part of it. And this accountant mentality has to be set aside, and not talk about only in quantitative terms, but qualitatively how you are going to
Now,
present it.
in the business school, do the students study Wolfgang Goethe, the German poet Goethe, who
Yeah.
wrote about this, about the nature? No, they don't do. So, and so that for you, the accountancy is like the Moshe law, God law, I don't know, or Buddha law, as you like to call this. Okay, no, not at all. Not this is a tremendous mistake. We can't fall into this mouse trap.
Right. Yes, I think yes. In engineering colleges and management schools, they should definitely teach them or make them go through Goethe's poems about nature, and that would really make them more sensitive to it.
Of course, of course.
We have another question regarding for altruism and other intangibles to be given importance in an organization, it has to come from the top. But if leadership is not evolved, it won't happen. So personal evolution is a long process that happens very, very selectively. How to speed up this process of personal evolution on one side, and the very idea of altruism flowing from the top, because it is the leadership which really matters. So do you think that we need to directly address the leaders first?
Depends on the culture of the community, of a country, of a continent. Where I live, in the part of the world I live, especially in the south of Europe, the leaders are those who are the kings of the status quo. And they are so comfortable. It's a comfort zone. They like very much the status quo. The status quo means a fortune. So that we need may I say, like Gandhi, a peaceful revolution, with the sort of salt strike, the Gandhi strike, the salt strike, things like this we need. This means changing the way of living. I give you an example. Forget about a very rich person. The model of living of someone, a professor, a lawyer, who gains per month, say 3, 4, 5,000 euros per month, things like this, as an apartment property. Okay, the model is, okay, I save money and buy a second house for the holidays, or I buy a new car. If we use the money in this way, nothing happens. For people who have some money available, there is a need to create new schools, new reimagined schools.
Right.
It's up to the parents, not to the government, the leaders. I don't know in India so far nowadays. I don't know if there is another Gandhi. I have no idea about this. I'm not a politologist. I can say that the approach the beginners are the families, not the governments and the leaders.
No.
How many people they talk about among the leaders? They talk nowadays reimagining the school. Very few. Very few.
Yes, that is true all over the world. That is true all over the world. And you have rightly identified two very important things which I have noticed in your book. You talked about a lot about these new schools coming up, the new kind of reimagined schools and education, because that forms the human capital, as you have said. And you have also very beautifully mentioned about trust as an important element of the social capital.
Trust is, one of the problem, the historical problems of the backwardness of the south of Italy has been what the sociologists they call amoral familism. Amoral. Okay. You trust only your mother, your father, your sister. The cousin may be just the cousin, may be who knows. And then you don't trust the people outside your family.
Yeah.
Poor trust, if you don't trust the others, if you are not ready, keen to talk to people who are to the contrarians,
Right.
talk to the people who think different.
Right.
If you think that if being AI, we say in a different way, she say A, I say Z, then this conflict, you are enemy. Not at all.
Yes.
Those who, if there is a conflict of idea, I call this a conflict cognitive. If
Yes.
my
Conflict.
idea collide against Praveen idea, the two ideas, they collide, they generate a new idea, like
Right.
in the particles in the super collider in Geneva. So the positive cognitive conflicts are source of trust. Affective conflict, if you hate the contrarians, you are in trouble.
Right. That is true. That has been noticed elsewhere also, and we have a very serious votary of the rights of Earth, Mr. Harshvardhan. He is in the government, and he is doing excellent work in promoting the rights of the Earth. You know, the against the kind of irresponsible exploitation. And you have also mentioned earlier that the government should address such things and people in the government should be working towards it. And we have a live example here in Mr. Harshvardhan, who is a very senior customs official who talks about the rights of the earth. And he's a participant here, and we welcome him for his ideas. And finally, as you rightly said, you have ended your book by saying that the author welcomes engaging in what you called as cognitive conflict.
Yeah.
That's very important. You know, our ideas may be different and we may differ in so many ways, but coming together through what you have called as cognitive conflict will give rise to new ideas, and more such beautiful ideas are brought about. And you really mentioned about what is the importance of having a human-centered use of technologies.
Yeah, human-centered
Human-centered use of
yeah.
technologies. And we should seriously be thinking about finding a mechanism to, create real value in the minds of the entrepreneurs of the intangible and the invisible benefits, which are not really easily measurable, but they should be given that due importance so that a new generation, a new millennial, millennials who are entrepreneurs can come up with these ideas and use several of the ideas which you have presented in your book as a multifaceted cultural movement, and at the intersection of what you have called as science and humanities. And you have also talked about a transformative enterprise, and you have used four beautiful terms: redefinition, redistribution, and recombination of resources.
You see, the forget the intangibles means you get negative effects not tomorrow, but after 20 years.
Yes.
I give you an example. Northeast of Italy, northeast, which means Venice area, say, everybody knows where it is more or less.
Yeah.
It's a congested area. Pollution, air pollution is dramatic. Why? The idea was, I build my company close where I live. So I live in the downtown, in the small village downtown, in the area very close to my house. I raise my company. And many did in this way. So you have a tremendous traffic congestion and air pollution. But these effects came after years. Forgetting the tangibles generate trouble after 10, 15, 20 plus years.
Yes, that we need to have a long-term vision and look at it from from the point of view of nature as a subject and our being a very integrated part of nature. And I'm really thankful to you. If there are no further questions, I would like to conclude by thanking you profusely, Professor Formica, for presenting such wonderful ideas, which have uh, where you have really talked about econoscience, as you have rightly put it, as the interweaving of economy, knowledge, and renaissance on one side. And you have talked about creative ignorance, which is authentic, conscious, intentional, insightful, and perceptive. So that all new ideas will generate from the recognizing this creative ignorance and working towards that. Thank you so much, Professor Formica, for sparing your valuable time and spending with us. We hope to have more interactions in future, especially with your new book on the voice of nature, which you said has been published in December. Hopefully, I'll be able to get a copy of it and then read it, which is a wonderful experience. And we would also like to connect to that gentleman in Sweden. If you can share his, name, email ID, and contact details, we will be happy to have an interaction with him also, because he is the one who has come about with this report on intangibles and talked about all these factors which you have brought out in your book. So thank you once again, Professor Formica, for this wonderful interaction. And I request now Binaji to conclude the session.
Thank you so much, Krishnapani ji, Miss Professor Formica. It was such an informative talk, and literally, I think we have to sort of reimagine the future. Otherwise, we are in big trouble. Considering nature, considering our own greed, considering various things, I think we have to start reimagining the future and reimagining how we do business, and a whole lot of ideas that you put out here, which were really, really very good. And what really struck me was the Dutch had said, those who share multiply. And really, that is the truth. That is what we say, that, if you share, abundance comes to you. So that is very, very true. Thank you so much. And Krishnapani ji, thank you so much for, going through the book and for those wonderful questions, and for Professor Piero's responses, and very, very cleared everything for us. It's such a very clear vision that you have, and we hope that can actually fructify in the future. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you very much. I embrace you all and remind you, it seems one day, it seems that Kennedy said, a surgeon can kill you in 1 second. An economist takes 20 years.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much on that.
On that note, we'll close. Thank you so much. And please join us for our upcoming programs. We have a very, very interesting program on Friday, the 5th of February at 7 p.m. We have a program by Rona Rose Train, and she's going to be talking about her book, The Miracle Known as Ed Levine. And it's a very inspirational story of human grit and determination against all odds. So I would request you all to please tune in for that particular program. It's next Friday at the same time, 5th of February. And the details will be posted in all the WhatsApp groups and will be sent to you by email. Please block your dates for the upcoming webinar. At Rtambhara, we look forward to your presence every Friday, where we bring you interesting topics on holistic wellness and the arts, delivered by a host of distinguished, knowledgeable speakers. So thank you, all our audience. Thank you very much.